Okay, Oliver, this is episode 5. This is just the build for the refueling tanker. The idea here is to put something heavy in orbit that can carry enough fuel to refuel the orbital station. So this will be reusable, but it'll stay in space, meaning that once we send it up there, we will refuel it in orbit around Kerbin, and then it will fly out to the moon, rendezvous with the moon station and dock, and then refuel the lunar station. Then it doesn't need very much fuel to come back and circularize its Kerbin orbit to then rinse and repeat. So we're going to use some heat shields to circularize our orbit instead of our rocket engines to do so when we come back to Kerbin. So basically it's a fuel shuttle. We're going to put it in orbit permanently. We're going to fuel it in Kerbin orbit, fly it out to the moon, and use it to refuel the lunar space station so that our astronauts can go back and forth from the lunar surface to the orbital lunar station repeatedly. So at this point, I'm just trying to design the general heat shield system that's going to protect it while it uses the atmosphere to slow down to circularize its orbit. We're going to have to make these heat shields movable, so they're going to have to hinge up and down depending on what part of the operation they're in. So because things wobble based on the hinges, we have to use some sort of docking mechanism to stabilize them when they're in the heat shield position, and then when they're in the non-heat shield position. So this was a little bit of a challenge. I had to redo it several times. But the gist is right here I'm trying to set up something to make it so that when it's in the configuration for atmospheric flight, that the heat shields will actually stay in place instead of flutter about due to the sheer force that the atmosphere is putting on them. And of course I had to rethink it several times. So don't worry too much about this build. This is a complicated build. At some point you'll get here. You'll probably start designing things that are even better than what I can do. Yeah, I couldn't do it all symmetrically, so. One of the benefits of this is that the heat shield systems are actually very lightweight, don't have a lot of mass, so it's fairly cheap to use over and over, as opposed to always refueling the lunar station from the surface of Kerbin. Because once again, the idea is that once you get to Kerbin orbit, or Earth orbit, so to speak, you're halfway to anywhere in the solar system. So to keep something in orbit is kind of a go-between. And so up here, this is going to be the locking mechanism that I'm designing for non-heat shield operations. Can't really have the heat shields in the way of the rocket engine if you're going to use the rocket engine, so I had to build something to hold them up and out of the way. As you can see, it's a little bit tedious. Looks like I've got the deployed phase done, and I'm just getting the undeployed phase done here. Doing the final tweaks, and then at that point we will go ahead, or I'll go ahead and build the entire rocket. We're going to put a fairing around this to launch it. Once it's in orbit and it doesn't have to deal with the atmospheric drag of launch, then the heat shields will take over. We can get rid of the fairing. Now I'm getting the action group set up so that just at a push of a button we can either deploy them or retract them. So action group 8 will be the undocking of the docking modules to release their hold, and then 9 will be the movement of the hinge to deploy or retract. And then 10 will also be, well, 9 will be deployment and 10 will be retract. The 10 key on the keyboard. This will be the retracted position. Now we're going to go ahead and build our two-stage rocket to get this out to orbit. We want to get this to orbit fully fueled so that we can fly it directly out to the lunar orbit so it can refuel the space station before we move on to Kerbal operations, getting them to the surface. So the next episode will be the launch and refueling of the space station. That'll be episode 6, and then episode 7 we're going to go ahead and build our lunar base for our lunar surface for our Kerbal astronauts. For now we got a two-stage rocket. We're going to be looking to get about, looks like the second stage is at 1400 meters a second of delta V, and we're probably going to be looking at about 2200 or so, 2000 meters a second delta V in the first stage. For a combined total more than 3300 is what we're looking for. Just to make sure we can get up to orbit and out to the moon. Maybe more like 4000 total.